Deep into the high school football season, and we're going to continue bringing you the best of what to expect for this upcoming week of Week 6. This is Football Insiders. I'm Jason Andera, Midco Sports. This is Michael McCleary, Argus leader, and a lot to talk about this week again, Michael. Let's start, as we always do, in 11 AAA, which, you know, we still have one undefeated team, the Jefferson Cavaliers, and then kind of a mix of surprise. Last week, Harrisburg came out and showed out, especially in the second half against Lincoln, maybe vaulting them up with O'Gorman as a contender here.
Yeah, the team that lost to Jefferson to start their sort of, incredible start to the season. So, I wrote in the Argus this week. I wrote a column that I do every Monday, and Harrisburg, Brandon White told me last year that there's no rebuilding at Harrisburg, and it really looked like after 1 week there might be, but that was a quick rebuild because they won their last 3 games and they're looking really, really good.
I think they all kind of took a step back and said, hey, we can't rest on anything we did last year. You could tell Dylan Elrod really needed a game just to experience the varsity level, and then he got back and he looks really good in the last couple of weeks. And I just think this Harrisburg team has really turned a corner and are moving in the right direction. But before we get too much into that, let's talk about O'Gorman as well. This is a team that is putting up record numbers offensively. Their quarterback, Bennett Dannenbring, already the career leader at O'Gorman for passing touchdowns. And the guys they have to throw it to have just been unbelievable this year. This is a really fun team to watch. It's a team I got to watch take out in 35, the automatic clock started running in the second half against a ranked team. That's pretty good.
Yeah, and I think we sort of knew what their weapons were going to be coming into the year, but they still found some other ones. But the real story with O'Gorman is, of course they're going to find those guys. They always do every single year. But the guys that are returning have really taken such incredible steps forward. Specifically, Ryan Satter. He's turned into one of the best weapons in South Dakota, and Bennett Dannenbring throwing him the football is maybe the best passer in South Dakota.
He really is.
It's incredible the offensive numbers that they put up, and they could lose to as many AA teams as they can. I'm still going to be high on O'Gorman.
Yeah, exactly. And we kind of forget that Maverick Jones, their running back, is one of the two, probably the number one running back in 11 AAA this year. 479 yards rushing, 8 touchdowns in those 4 games. He's been really impressive, especially considering the line that he has. A little undersized pretty much every week. They're going against an undersized or an oversized opponent compared to them. So they've been really good. So that's been a lot of fun to watch. Let's talk about some of the upcoming games this week. Jefferson at Mitchell. I don't expect much here. I think Nelson Wright sat out last week, and we expect him to sit out again this week. That changes them a little bit, but they shouldn't have any problem with Mitchell.
Yeah, no. Their passing offense is too strong, and obviously their defense has really started to show some things in recent weeks. So, yeah, against Mitchell, I think they're going to go 5-0.
Yeah, and then a couple other games, maybe the game of the week, Lincoln at O'Gorman. This is where O'Gorman's schedule really gets tough. They've got Lincoln, then they get Jefferson. We're going to find out if O'Gorman can hang with some of these top teams very quickly.
Yeah, Lincoln's taken a couple losses in recent weeks, but I really think that Lincoln, we've been talking about them since the beginning of the year. I really think that they can show some things, and they obviously had sort of the inverse of their schedule where, they played some difficult teams at the beginning of the season. So, I think this is going to be a tough game for them, but I think it's going to be, they're both going to get challenged in this one.
Yeah, Lincoln is really interesting because they came out of the year, they maybe didn't play their best against Roosevelt, but ended up getting a convincing win in week 1, and then Rapid City Central wasn't much of a test for them. And then after that, the Jefferson game, they got blown out in the first half, came back, played okay in the second half. Then they played well against Harrisburg in the first half, and then they didn't play well. So it's kind of a story of halves with these guys almost. You can see the potential there for Lincoln, and I think this will be a huge measuring stick for them to see what they can do against O'Gorman. I'll be interested to see that one. I'm going to check that one out. I'll be at that sideline for sure. Let's talk about Harrisburg and Roosevelt. We talked a little bit about Harrisburg already. Roosevelt's still looking for that first win, but the dynamic duo of Titan Tryon and Max Carlson has been unbelievable, and Dylan Elrod delivering the ball. The last 2 weeks, these guys have combined for 563 yards receiving. They've really found something in a couple possession receivers and big play receivers in Tryon and Carlson.
Yeah, I remember some of the Harrisburg players saying before the season that tight end Tryon, watch out for that kid because he might be one of the best receivers in South Dakota. And that's a name I recognize as a young receiver who played some impact last year. But just what he's done this year has been just absolutely incredible. And for them to find a second target, Dylan Elrod is a big part of that. He's really been coming along in recent weeks. He had 370 yards passing this past week, and he's a legit quarterback in AAA. And Harrisburg is scary when they have a legit quarterback.
Yeah, so I think, with 3 wins in a row and Roosevelt on the line, this is a team that could vault up to a top 2 team, especially if O'Gorman will slip up here in the next couple of weeks. Stevens, Brandon Valley also going at it. Stevens trying to bounce off a couple losses in a row. Brandon Valley starting to get right a little bit. They've found a good receiving combo with Dylan Langrock and Nate Andreessen, who had big weeks last week, and Lucas Slack looking a little better. So this Brandon Valley team trying to turn the corner a little bit before they have to face Pierre coming up next week. This will be a get-right game for them. Let's go to 11 AA now, and this is kind of a recurring theme for us, but we kind of keep talking about what's the difference between Pierre, T, and Yankton. Well, last week, Pierre got to play Yankton. That was our first litmus test, and it wasn't pretty.
No, Pierre, they every single week, we wonder just how much better. We know that they're sort of at the top, but it's sort of just how much. 45 points is what last week it was against Yankton. So
and they ran the ball. Lincoln Kienholz ran for 193 of those yards, but they had more running, so they did a little differently. They got 7 sacks on defense, took care of Rugby Riken, one of the best playmakers in 11 AA, and they ran the ball. Lincoln Kienholz this year, in his 4 games, he's had a hand in, whether it's passing or rushing, 6 touchdowns in 3 of those 4 games, and the other game had 5 touchdowns. This guy is having an epic season.
Yeah, and just yesterday, On3 Sports ranked him as the 10th best quarterback in the nation in his class. I mean, it's special that we have a guy like that in South Dakota.
He just makes it look so darn easy, and he continues to do that. What a year so far for Lincoln Kienholz. So we saw that Pierre is better than Yankton, and then T had no problems with Douglas. But let's talk about the big game this week where T area gets another test. They're still undefeated, but they had the O'Gorman test a couple weeks ago. Now a test with Rugby Riken, and they have to go on the road to play Yankton. Last time they played was last year in the semifinals, and that was actually the first time they've ever played each other. And T got a huge lead in that one, and Rugby Riken almost brought him back. And both teams feel like, I know Yankton feels like they're better than they were last year.
Yeah, a game that T area definitely wished wasn't as exciting as it was last year because, Rugby Riken, I believe he scored 21 points in, that second half or something like that. It was something crazy.
Yeah.
T coming off that O'Gorman win, they're still undefeated, and, Yankton coming off a, pretty bad loss to Pierre. I mean, you wonder how close these 2 and 3 are. But this I feel like will be a good litmus test for T to see just if they're that much above Yankton, then okay, then we were right about the Pierre sort of T comparison. But if they're right in there with it, you don't know. Maybe Yankton just had a bad week last week, but it's this was a game that I had circled on my calendar before the season, and I think it's still a good game today.
I do too. I think this Yankton team, they've actually gone through a lot that, as far as injuries and just overcoming things on the team just to get where they are. But it'll take a little luster off the season if they don't have a good showing at least against T because of what just happened in Pierre last week. Plus, they have a home game against T. They're going to really rally and try to make this thing interesting and make themselves into a contender this year. I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens in that one. Let's move to 11A, and this is always one that always entertaining. Let's just put it that way. You got a chance to look at the number 1 team last week in West Central. What were your takeaways in that game?
Yeah, I mean, West Central has a really, really good team. They on the defensive side, they pitched a shutout. I remember just sort of the passing game where Vermillion just tried to get anything going on the outsides. It was just sort of, West Central had a few interceptions, but, just the pass breakups that they were able to get, just like they got in front of everything. And obviously they could rush the passer pretty well. They have pretty good size on the line. But, I'm really impressed with Justin Zerpel. I mean, he just sort of, we were talking about it before the show, he sort of just, gets yards by, just pure will. He's a very strong kid, and, he just kind of puts his head down and just runs through people. And he's very, very quick. He's a weapon that's scary to have in a division like 11A. So, yeah, I mean, I'm really impressed by them.
Yeah, I thought they played a heck of a game as well, and I was just going to pick up, look at his numbers from last week. 23 carries, 114 yards, and a touchdown. He was efficient throwing the ball, 9 of 12. He didn't have to throw a lot for 123 yards, so ran over 100, passed over 100, threw 2 touchdowns, ran 1 in. He is the real deal, and that's why West Central's number 1 this week. Another big game last week, Del Rapids took on Canton. Canton came out, looked really good in the early part of the game, but Del Rapids was able to just get them under control. And Canton has a really good defense, but Del Rapids was able to find a way to take advantage of some good field position and then really move the ball down the field with their running game. They've been better in the running game than I thought they would this year. And then Jack Henry's done a great job at quarterback as well. So Del Rapids still undefeated, a little quietly at number 2 there. And then after that, all these teams have had a loss in some form or fashion. Beersford, Canton, Dakota Valley, Lennox, Sioux Falls Christian, Madison. But all of those teams feel like they could make some kind of a push here, Mike.
Yeah, and one of the things I talked to West Central head coach Chris Hernandez with last week was, obviously, we sort of talked about it last week where, these teams at the top seemed like they were a little unstable, and, one loss can really just sort of change up the rankings and everything. And after 33-0 win, you probably feel comfortable with your spot. But, Chris Hernandez was saying, we don't play them in the regular season, but Del Rapids, they're a team to really keep an eye on. And I think there are a lot of teams that have competed with a lot of those top 2 teams throughout the year. So, this class is still wide open. And I really think that those top 2 teams shouldn't feel totally safe, even if they keep on getting off wins.
Del Rapids has a home game against Millbank, and West Central has a home game. They play Canton, and this Canton team has lost a couple. They've won a couple. They've had a tough game every single week. I'll tell you what, last season it was a 6-0 game between Canton and West Central. They've had just really low-scoring games over the last couple of years. I expect another low-scoring game between Canton and West Central, and I would not be shocked at all if Canton came in and played right with West Central or even got a win on the road. That's how close I think 11A is right now. 7 total scores between those 2 teams in their last 3 matchups. So if you're shooting highlights of that game, stay for the whole game, because anytime you get a touchdown might be the last. That'll be a lot of fun to check that out. A game to kind of watch. Beersford takes on Lennox, and now these are a couple of teams with just 1 loss. And, sometimes you get that loss and you just put them in a different group. But I'll tell you what, these 2 teams, I have something to prove. I think this is going to be a really fun game between Braden Wolf of Lennox and Beersford with Tate Van Otterloo and Peyton Friedrich and all these guys that run the ball. There's a lot of stars in this game. I can't wait to see what Beersford maybe can do to Lennox, and Lennox could have a coming out party if they compete well in this one. So let's look at 11A. At 11B, we'll just look at the rankings because there's not a lot of big games coming up this week. But Winter did it again, 5-0. Their schedule gets pretty tough here in the next couple of weeks, right? I think they got West Central coming up later in the season, which is a game I'm really looking forward to. But Winter's really challenged themselves with a couple of 11A opponents this year. But they still feel like that top team here, don't they, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there really hasn't been many teams that, even in the past 2 years, if you look at it, have really challenged them. And, obviously, they had that they had the 11A matchup with Beersford a couple weeks ago. You mentioned West Central, which comes up.
When is
that's
that?
Going to be October 7th.
Okay.
And then they finish off the season with Mount Vernon Plankinton.
Yeah, it gets tough here for Winter.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at their next 3 games, it's Bridgewater, Emory Ethan, West Central, and Mount Vernon Plankinton to finish off the season. I mean, those are 3 really tough games. Obviously, you got the 2 11B opponents that are really sort of,
right there
at the top. And then you get the
Undefeated.
11A opponent, who's the number 1 team in 11A. So that's a really tough end of season schedule for winter. And Beersford, even though it was a 22-0 loss for them, they really did limit winter in a way that no other team has.
Yeah, they had to get a punt return touchdown, and then they got one big play from Aiden Barfus. But really, I mean, they weren't just mowing people down like they usually do.
Yeah, absolutely. And you would expect some of these teams at the end of the season to give them similar challenge, where the defense and maybe one big play is going to be the difference.
Another quick note, Bridgewater Emory Ethan got a road win against Sioux Valley last week, taking Sioux Valley out of the rankings, and Bridgewater Emory Ethan continues. They continue to get stronger these last couple of weeks, despite not having their quarterback from the beginning of the year. But they still hold on to that number 2 ranking barely. In the vote numbers, you see 70-68. Elk Point Jefferson gets a little closer, and a few more votes every week for number 2, and they still haven't overcome. And I'm sure they don't care too much about that, but I'll tell you what, I have been voting Elk Point Jefferson number 2. That's for sure.
Me too.
Roncalli gets their first time into the top 5. They have scored 70 points and 50 points in the last couple of weeks. So the offense is clicking for Roncalli. I have to mention that as well. Let's look at some 9-man football. We've got Howard remaining at number 1, and this week, last week I questioned, maybe they shouldn't be number 1. I'm not sure. And they took it to Freeman Mary and Freeman Academy. They look good again. I think Howard deserves that number 1 ranking in 9AA. But any other comments on 9AA from what you saw last week, Michael?
No, I mean, Wall and Hamlin still remain undefeated. They're still really doing well. We talk about Wall every single week and how these games have not really been too close. But it was nice for Howard to get one that wasn't too close, because they've played a couple really close games, and I feel like almost unfairly that might have been one of the things that have been maybe holding people back from giving them all the first place votes. So for them to finally show out and just absolutely blow out a team, it's nice for them to sort of get their sort of, I guess, number 1 ranking moment.
Yeah, exactly. That was a good win for them. I also have to mention Elkton Lake Benton, still undefeated, receiving votes right now in the top 5, but not a top 5 team. But they beat Canastota. Now Canastota's had a really tough schedule, and their record doesn't look sparkling. But that's a good team that they beat last week. So congratulations to Elkton Lake Benton. That's a team to keep an eye on in 9AA. 9A, Gregory stays at number 1, but look at this. We've got number 1 votes for Warner and Castlewood as well. Lyman is a team that I think is a very good team, still undefeated at number 4. And Alcester Hudson makes the top 5 for the first time this year. They're still undefeated at 5-0. Canastota gets knocked out of the rankings for the first time this year. And let's take a look at 9B, where Harriet Selby gets all the votes at number 1, but Hitchcock-Tulare made quite a statement. Actually, both those top 2 teams made quite a statement last week. Harriet Selby area taking it to a 9AA team, and Brendan Begeman rushing for over 300 yards in that game. Hitchcock-Tulare taking on a top 5 team and 50 burgering them. 50 points against a top 5 team. That was impressive. Those 2 teams really feel like the class of 9B, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
Those are the teams to watch. And then, so this week we've got some interesting matchups. Lyman takes on Wall. The last couple of years, Wall has handled Lyman. I think Lyman's a little better team than they have been, but it'll still be a tough game for them. Hamlin takes on Castlewood. Hamlin, number 3 in 9AA, takes on the number 3 team in 9A. Castlewood's been kind of a surprise this year, but I'll tell you what, if they show out against Hamlin, I think people are going to notice them in 9A and might even bump them up to getting a few more number 1 votes this year. And then Harriet Selby area takes on Sully Buttes, a battle of unbeaten teams in 9B, but I believe these teams are in different tiers. I think Harriet Selby area is clearly in the top tier. Sully Buttes hasn't had a huge test yet. I think they're going to struggle with Harriet Selby this week. So that's a look at what I expect in 9-man football. What do you got coming up, Mike, with your coverage at the Argus Leader?
Well, Friday I'm going to go out to Yankton to watch Yankton
That'll
T.
be good.
That's going to be a fun game. We talked about it earlier. It's this will teach us a lot about both of those teams. And then back in Sioux Falls, we got a Stringer going to O'Gorman Lincoln, so that'll be a fun game too. So yeah, we got a full slate of Friday games coming.
Excellent, and that's the game I'm going to go watch is O'Gorman and Lincoln. Those 2 teams taking on each other. They've had a good history in the last couple of years. It's been back and forth a little bit. We don't have any live games on Midco Sports this week, but we do have Varsity Sports Live Friday night at 10:30. We'll have highlights from a lot of these games that we just talked about. Well, for Michael McCleary, I'm Jason Andera. That'll do it for this week of Football Insiders. We'll see you next week.